that, that's I'm sure going to be in the minds of not just, again, administration officials, but also Congress as they consider debating this new stimulus package.
Dan, great to catch up, sir. As always, my best to you and the team. Dan Arndt of BNP Paribas. It's a little bit of a Swiss cheese calculation, Lisa, so forgive me. There's a lot of holes in it, but I think just as a basic idea, if you think about the millions of jobs we still need to recover over the last 9 months in the United States of America, if you're going to generate jobs at $250K a month, you're not getting it done for years, not months, years. And to fill those gaps, it's going to take a long time.
And I'm struck by the participation rate that's kind of remaining pretty low relative to where it was earlier this year, this idea that people have dropped out of the labor force. What's going to bring them back, right? I mean, will there be jobs that they have the skills for them when they're ready and when the economy gets back up and running?
Coming up on this program, it's a struggle for this industry, an industry close to all of our hearts, I know. Chef Daniel Boulud on the service sector, on restaurants and the hospitality business. This is Bloomberg.
With the First Word News, I'm Ritika Gupta. Joe Biden has chosen California Attorney General Javier Becerra to be his Health and Human Services Secretary. Becerra's job will be to curb the coronavirus pandemic and expand the Affordable Care Act. Becerra is a former congressman but has little experience in the health industry. U.S. Attorney General William Barr is considering whether to step down before President Trump's term ends next month. That's according to the New York Times. The president was angered last week when Barr acknowledged that the Justice Department found no widespread voter fraud in the election. The UK will not continue trade talks with the European Union next year if negotiators can't reach a deal this month. That comes from a spokesman for Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He says the Brexit transition period will not be extended past December 31st. Earlier, a British official warned that talks could collapse today. And Apple is looking to outperform Intel's fastest chips. It's planning a series of new Mac processors for introduction as early as next year. Apple engineers are working on several successors to the M1 custom chip. That was Apple's first main processor that debuted last month. If they live up to expectations, they'll outpace the performance of machines running Intel chips. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers. Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
We explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment. The politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
The combination of the vaccine, but also we're now starting mass testing of those who are asymptomatic, leads us to have hope towards the new year. We're hoping to see tourists return to our city next summer. It's really important they do so and safely.
Hope, it's a word you keep hearing. It's a sentiment we all share. Hope for the next 12 months. That was Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. From London and New York this morning, good morning. Alongside Lisa Abramowitz, I'm Jonathan Ferro. Tom Keane back with us tomorrow. Coming up at the Open on Bloomberg TV in around about 15 minutes' time. Richard Bernstein, the CEO and founder of Richard Bernstein Advisors. We'll have that conversation, Lisa, in about 20 minutes on a market at all-time highs.
Yeah, very interesting to hear how much people are positioning for an ongoing momentum here versus pushing back on the consensus. Right now, I want to turn to the landscape. When you go down in big cities right now, you see tents. People are trying to set them up to get people in to keep business as the weather gets colder and colder. You're also seeing a lot of shuttered restaurant storefronts. Chef Daniel Boulud, very aware of this, on the front lines, watching this with both his own restaurant as well as others that he is working with collaboratively to try to save New York City's restaurant scene. Chef Boulud, thank you so much for coming back on our show. I want to just ask, what do you think?
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning.
Good morning. What do you think the New York restaurant scene will look like post-pandemic?
Well, right now, we are trying to imagine that it will come back to a normalcy with some tweaking toward that. But we really, right now, we are really struggling. Every restaurateur is struggling all over the country, especially in the northern part, with the fact that they have to deal with the cold weather and the outdoor still active. At Daniel, for example, we build private bungalows, heated bungalows, insulated. It's fantastic. People really love that. But it's still not a business model. And also at 25%, it's not a business model. So are we going to go back at 100% once we are back in business? I don't know. But right now, it's important to save jobs. It's important to support the community as well. And it is very important to encourage people to be able to go out and feel comfortable as well.
Chef, we were talking with our Sonali Basic earlier about Goldman Sachs and how they're thinking of moving some of their operations, at least the headquarters of them, to Florida. And there has been this feeling that perhaps some of the financial industry will move away from New York City and at least reduce business lunches and other types of events. How concerned are you about that longer term for the prospects of the higher end New York City restaurant scene?
Well, it will always exist, and I think New York City will always have a vibrant business support by restaurant support by business. But we'll see. We'll deal with it. But there'll be certainly also company taking the opportunity to come to New York City, and I think New York City will be back to what New York City was for sure. Will it take a year, 5 years, 10 years? But I am optimistic about New York City, of course. New York City is biggest city in the world when it comes to doing business and banking, of course. It's also a very prominent city for that. I hope the fine dining will, and all kind of dining, because really they support everything. I mean, from the staff supporting the little to-go or even fast casual to the fine dining, everyone get impacted.
Yeah.
And but right now, corporate city, what they should do if they want to support restaurants, they should buy a gift certificate. They should buy a gift to their employees, to their business people. They are not doing any corporate party. So at least we do a lot of gift to clients through that with our system we have developed with Daniel Boulud Kitchen.
Oh, nice, to deliver it to their homes in a way, instead of having a collective kind of dinner. There is also a question of creative destruction, this idea of restaurateurs that you know that have had to shutter some of their restaurants, whether they actually see this as a really good opportunity to begin thinking about their return, especially as rents go down. Have you heard about that kind of activity?
Of course, many, I mean, thousands and thousands of restaurants have closed all over the country, and many are not gonna quit. No one wants to quit. So for some, they are surviving, and for some, they are thinking of what should be the strategy next. And for me, I've only opened half of my business in New York City, and still I have to think of the strategy of reopening the rest of it. We are waiting also in New York to get back to normal with Lincoln Center and Broadway and the tourists, and everything will make that city vibrant and active, and certainly the city we have known.
So going forward, I know that you've been really involved in a number of initiatives to try to help both restaurants as well as some of the first responders. Can you give us a sense of where you are on that?
Well, of course, we have founded 7.5 months ago Food First Foundation with my partner Mark Holiday at SL Green, and we have distributed almost to the end of December 500,000 meals to New Yorkers in 25 different locations over Manhattan and the 5 boroughs, hospitals and food shelters, and of course also homeless shelter as well. And I support also City Meal on Wheels, where myself have produced about 200,000 meals so far to the elderly New Yorker as well, through Food First. So this is one of the initiatives, but many of my colleagues, chefs as well, have been really on the forefront of supporting their cities and trying to really, I mean, you know, when there is a charity, the first one who get called is the chef, the second maybe the entertainer. And so here we are frontline again to make sure that we support our community.
Chef Boulud, just before I let you go, when you're alone, do you actually cook elaborate meals for yourself?
I like the one-pot meal, where
join the club.
It takes me half an hour, and but it's a process. It's you start by what take the longest and give the most flavor to what will take the least, and maybe just give a particular texture to it. And of course, always a pinch of spice inside.
Always.
I have a young chef who used to work for me. I have a business called La Boîte aux Épices, and he's doing an amazing array of spice already mixed. So you always have a pinch of that, and it makes the dish wonderful.
Thank you so much, Chef Boulud. Daniel Boulud, chef and restaurateur, we appreciate you joining us, and best of luck as we face this winter and beyond with the rebirth of a number of restaurants. Right now, looking at markets as we all contemplate that one-pot meal with a pinch of spice that I'm sure doesn't taste as good as his. We see the NASDAQ, it's actually turned positive on the day. The S&P off of the earlier lows, now down just 0.25%. The euro gaining versus the dollar. VIX coming up, yields lower, almost to the session lows, 0.936% on the 10-year yield. Lisa Abramowitz, Jonathan Farrow, Tom Keene rejoining us tomorrow. This is Bloomberg Television.
once it goes into this plant, it's heated up very quickly to 600 or so degrees. It basically carbonizes it, turns it into a carbon-rich material. Obviously kills all of the pathogens.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
For our audience worldwide, good morning, good morning. The countdown to the open starts right now. We begin with the big issue. Record infections sweeping across the country. States implementing tighter restrictions with hospitalizations threatening healthcare systems. Regions across California facing stay-at-home advisories through the next year. Hoping to slow the spread with experts expecting conditions.
Things are going to continue to get worse for the next 4 to 6 weeks. We're not likely to see a peak in the number of infections until about the end of December, maybe into January.
The vaccinations are on the horizon. The FDA potentially ruling on emergency use this week as Secretary Alex Azar unveils a possible timeline.
We're going to focus on those most vulnerable and those most on the front lines of treating people with COVID with the initial 40 million doses in the next month. And then we're just going to progressively keep adding more and more people. So be thinking in the February-March timeframe that you're going to see more general vaccination. And by the second quarter of next year, we'll have enough vaccine for every American that wants it.
Leaving Americans looking for assistance to bridge a gap until the second quarter, putting the spotlight on Capitol Hill, where a bipartisan aid bill is gaining momentum.
Now, neither have said, oh, we'll sign your bill. That's fair. We have final language. Our final language, Chris, will probably come out earlier this week. And so then people can look at it and we can modify it as needed. But the indications I get, the pain of the American people is driving this, and I'm optimistic that both those leaders will come on board.
And everybody else is hopeful. Negotiations continue today. Congress looking to secure a deal before departing for recess. President-elect Joe Biden suggesting this won't be the last act.
It's essential we provide immediate relief for working families and businesses now. Any package passed in the lame duck session is not going to be enough overall. It's critical, but it's just a start. Congress are going to need to act again in January.
Joining us now, Bloomberg's Kelly Lyons and Michael McKee. Kelly, let's begin with you. More numbers that don't make for good reading.
No, they don't, John. The numbers growing more devastating all across the country. Several U.S. states posting record infections and hospitalizations rising by more than 2,000 a day. The big news, of course, coming from California yesterday, reporting more than 30,000 new coronavirus cases. That was a record, and as a result, the large portion of the state is back under stay-at-home order. About 70% of the population affected by that. Bars, hair salons, other businesses will have to close, and that will be in effect for at least 3 weeks. When you look at the U.S. as a whole, we are near our peak in terms of the infection rate. When you look at the 14-day rolling average of cases per 1,000 people, the UK is near its peak as well, while other countries in continental Europe are starting to see improvements due to more restrictive measures. The light at the end of the tunnel, of course, for all countries, John, is coming potentially in the form of a vaccine. The U.S. could approve Pfizer's shot as early as this Thursday. That, of course, has already gotten approval in the U.K., where it should be rolled out starting tomorrow. And, of course, Moderna's similar vaccine is seeking FDA approval as well. The question, John, is are enough people actually going to take it? You need about 80% of the population covered to achieve herd immunity. And right now, according to an Ipsos survey, only 4 countries are showing enough support to meet that threshold: India, China, South Korea, and Brazil. At the tail end of that chart on the right side is the U.S. and France, which have the least support for getting a shot. Only 54% of French adults say they'd be willing to take it. There's concerns about efficacy, about potential side effects, as we do have to keep in mind, John, that these vaccines were rushed through at a record pace. John.
They were. Katie, thank you. And Secretary Azar with a timeline there out to Q2. Pretty clear that we need that age to bridge to get us there. Michael McKee joins us now for more on the policy front. Mike, it looks like over the last week or so, things have become more constructive.
Well, to a certain extent, John, but this is Congress. You can never tell. I'm going to mix 2 metaphors here and say there's an old saying that nothing concentrates the mind like a hanging. And at the same time, Congress has 2 swords of Damocles hanging over their head. One, the virus, as Kayleigh was talking about, rampaging out of control. And the other are 2 fiscal cliffs that are coming up very quickly. Here's a look at the key dates. This Friday, the government runs out of money. And the Defense Department, funded separately, is likely to see a bill passed and vetoed by the president because it doesn't include a provision that would take away legal protections from Facebook and Twitter and other online services. December 31st, we've talked about this a lot, extended unemployment benefits and other CARES Act provisions expire. The hope is, and it may be just hope, that they can wrap those 2 things together, the spending bill and virus relief, and get it passed by the end of the week. The fallback plan is to pass a 1-week funding extension and try to get both through by December 18th. They hope to pass a spending bill that lasts through 2021. If they can't, the fallback 2 is a 3-month bill that kicks the can into the Biden administration. Issue 2, virus relief, seems to come down to whether or not Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's in a good mood. The relief bill put together by the bipartisan group of senators, and you can see their provisions there, has been gaining support, and they hope to release the text of the measure today. But while it's much smaller than House Democrats have been holding out for, it's twice the size of McConnell's proposal. So the question is, will he go along? And you notice one other thing on that list. There is nothing on there in terms of checks to go out individuals in America. The president said he wanted checks. It would add a lot to the bill. There's still pressure to put that in. We'll see where they come out. This is going to be a week to watch.
Mike, another week to watch on the fiscal front. And right to point out that this is aid, not stimulus. It's aid. Richard Bernstein of RB Advisor is not optimistic about the outcome of these talks. He goes on to write the following: investors should expect a low bar for negotiations as politics on both sides of the aisle are overwhelming public need. It is unlikely local government employment will rebound without federal assistance, and it is also unlikely that the private sector can pick up the slack. Richard joins us now for more. So, Richard, let's talk about that. The outlook that people have become so much more constructive over. Do you share that?
Well, Jonathan, good morning. I do. I think you've got this kind of weird tug of war going on between the virus and the reality of a national emergency, which I don't understand why people won't call it a national emergency. That's really what it is. And on the other side, you've got this massive monetary stimulus. And so, to date, the monetary stimulus has been winning. It's been beating the virus. But for the stock market, that's kind of what's going on. The point in the quote that you just mentioned was to point out the lack of aid, using your word, the lack of aid is starting to pull back now on that tug of war. And I think we have to be very careful as we look forward. You know, we have to deal with the national emergency, and if people aren't going to deal with it, it's going to start winning.
Well, I think, Richard, we've been conditioned, though, to believe through experience that dips are there to be bought. And I think so many people hold that view right now, Richard, that there are no dips anymore in the way that there might have been. We also know that when governments start to correct course, when state and local officials start to correct course with restrictions, the peak's not too far behind. And once again, that's usually an opportunity for risk appetite and risk assets to take another leg higher. So, Richard, I'd ask, why would this be any different?
Well, I think, Jonathan, number one, we do have this huge monetary stimulus. You got to remember, money growth in the United States is running 23, 24, 25%. That is off the charts. We've never seen anything like that, certainly in my professional career, nothing even close. This is about, you know, 2/3 faster than the money growth of the 1970s. So this is off the charts from that side. On the other side, you've also got earnings and very easy earning comparison. As you go through 2021, earnings comparisons versus 2020, because of the pandemic, are going to be very, very easy. And earnings are going to boom for a lot of companies. Not necessarily the big safe haven companies, but secondary and tertiary cyclical companies are going to see very big changes in their earnings growth, which hopefully will aid employment and investment.
Richard, let's get to some of the calls. Add to cyclicals, to US small, to Europe small caps, to energy, to materials, to industrials. You and I have had a pretty nuanced conversation about the outlook, but some of the calls I'm seeing from RB, Richard, they're in there with the consensus. And I'm not here to say groupthink is wrong, per se. I'm just saying that is what the group thinks at the moment. So, Richard, where do you get that differentiation? Where does it come from in the next 12 months?
Well, I think, Jonathan, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, you know, my colleague Dan Suzuki, who you know well, often points out that you have to differentiate between what people are saying and what people are doing. And I'm not quite sure we're seeing, especially among institutional investors and private clients, I don't think we're seeing this rush to value, a rush to cyclicals and things like that. You know, a lot of people are, the rush is still to venture capital, to private equity, to technology, to innovators and disruptors and things like that. I think, you know, I think one could argue how far out of consensus we are, and I would admit that, but I think we're still a little bit of the salmon swimming upstream here.
Groupthink hasn't become group action just yet. That was what I heard someone say over the weekend. Richard, it's great to catch up, sir. My best to you.
Thanks,
and to Dan and to the whole of the team. Richard Bernstein, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. About 20 minutes away from the opening bell, equities pulling back from all-time highs. Record on the S&P, the NASDAQ, the Russell. We pull back just a little bit. The market desk with more. Here's Abigail.
John, before we take a look at some of those cyclical movers pulling back, as you're mentioning, we do have some breaking news, and that is the fact that Airbnb has boosted their IPO price range to $56 to $60 per share, up from $44 to $50, indicating very strong interest for this upcoming IPO. As for movers here in the pre-market, we're coming off the lows, but the cyclical trade that has dominated the fourth quarter coming off a little bit today. We see ExxonMobil and other big energy names down in sympathy with oil. We also have the big banks lower as the yield curve flattens and yields are coming in as bonds that rally, not a rally so much, but some gains for bonds. So yields are coming in. And then on the other hand, you have travel stocks. Now, the airlines not so long ago had been sharply lower. We now have American Airlines getting a little bit of a bid. Carnival coming well off the low. So it seems that that move, that catch-up trade into those travel stocks that are so beaten down on the day, some investors trying to move in that direction once again this morning, even without the banks and energy participating. One stock that just continues to go higher, John, that of course is Tesla. There isn't any news, but we do have this stock up more than 1% on the year. As you know, the best stock for the NASDAQ 100. One reason we do have the NASDAQ outperforming on the year, or today on the year as well, and right now on the year, John, Tesla is up an amazing 616%. Just doesn't seem to be stopping.
Absolutely unreal. Abigail, thank you. We'll touch base with you a little bit later in the program. Coming up on this show, the outlook for fiscal policy beyond January 2021 hinges on two races down in Georgia. We'll head there next as the president hits the campaign trail once again. And we'll catch up with Ashok Bhatia of Neuberger Berman, the deputy fixed income CIO, coming up very shortly. This is Bloomberg.
a sense of the real-time action. The 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
Their CPG history, their experience, and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
They cheated and they rigged our presidential election, but we will still win it. We will still win it. We'll still win it. And they're going to try and rig this election, too. Your governor could stop it very easily if he knew what the hell he was doing. He could stop it very easily.
The President of the United States rallying in Georgia, where his refusal to concede is complicating next month's Senate runoff elections. The state's Governor Brian Kemp slamming the Trump administration's legal efforts, writing the following. Their claims would be extraordinary if true, but they're not. The claims of election fraud and malfeasance belong more to the Kraken's realm of mythos than they do to reality. Republican incumbent Kelly Loeffler still refusing to acknowledge President Trump's defeat in the state during a public debate.
The president has the right to pursue every legal recourse to make sure that this was a free and fair election in Georgia. And we know that these audits have turned up thousands of votes that were initially uncounted. And I've called for a signature audit. And the buck stops with the Secretary of State.
Bloomberg Chief Washington correspondent Kevin Cerulli joins us now with the latest. Kevin, it's a conversation you and I have had a few times over the last week, whether the president's participation in the campaigning effort for him on Saturday actually helps or hinders the effort in Georgia for January 5th.
Well, Senator Kelly Loeffler's banking that it is going to help her defeat Reverend Raphael Warnock. And in fact, during that contentious debate over the weekend, it was really Georgia politics on full display. You've got the Loeffler campaign talking about comments that Warnock had made in videos that have now surfaced in some of his sermons with regards to the military and religious freedoms. And then the Warnock campaign criticizing Loeffler by saying that she was anointed to her seat and not elected. Of course, she was tapped after there had been an opening in that state. So look, I think the bottom line here is that both of the sides are suggesting that the future of the Senate and the power that Georgia voters have right now is going to be on full display. But really the driving force, much more so than President Trump, is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He has been quarterbacking this campaign, and his entire political apparatus has been working with the donor class in order to make sure that turnout for Republicans gets Republicans the majority in the Senate come January 6th.
Kevin, just quickly from my side, if you can answer this would be great. The fiscal conversations that we've seen start to build again in the last week or so, how do they play into this, if at all?
I don't think they play into this whatsoever. I think that there are two different issues. I checked in with a source this morning who essentially said to me that fiscal stimulus talks are still very much on par for the lame duck session. And finally, I would just note that similarly to how the fiscal talks weren't in effect on the November elections, it's the same type of calculation down in Georgia.
Kevin, great to catch up. As always, good to see you. Second time this morning. Kevin's already there down in Washington, D.C. The read across from last week was pretty simple. Downside surprise on payrolls on Friday led many people to believe that meant that down in D.C. they were going to get something done on the fiscal side, and yields started to creep higher. This is a supply story, we're told. Is it just about supply, or is it more about what that supply achieves? Higher growth, higher inflation, the prospect of maybe even at some point down the road, higher interest rates. Joining us now is Ashok Bhatia of Neuberger Berman. Ashok, great to catch up with you, sir. Let's start there. The importance of supply in the outlook for the Treasury market. Just how important is it?
I think, hey, good morning, Jonathan. I think it's more what that supply means and some of the macro things that are going on in the bond market. And I think the most important development the last 4 to 6 weeks has been we're finally starting to see inflation break-evens widen. So something like 10-year inflation break-evens are about 20 wider than they were 4 to 6 weeks ago. And we're now actually wider levels, expecting a bit higher inflation than we started the year. And what that means is, we've seen stable, nominal nominal rate, so the 10-year is right around 95 to 1%. But because break-evens are rising, the market's expecting a bit higher inflation. Real rates are moving lower, and those two things, I think, have been the development that's been helpful for a lot of risk markets in the last few weeks.
Ashok, can you walk me through why we're pricing in that higher inflation, where that's coming from? Friday, we had payrolls come in sub 300K. We run at that rate month after month. It is going to take years to recover the gap that we opened up in the last 9 months in the labor market. Where's the inflation idea coming from, Ashok?
I think there's a few things. One is, an interesting development in this period has been consumers shifting what they spend money on. So certainly unemployment is too high, and there's the need to get the unemployment rate lower. But when you look at aggregate spending, consumers are spending a bit more on goods, less on services. And, I think one element is the market expects some of that will be permanent, and it's leading to higher goods prices, across the board, particularly for a lot of durables. I think second, there is a bit of a structural shift. The last 20 or 30 years have been about the government's giving central banks the responsibility to achieve macro outcomes like growth and inflation. And whether it's modern monetary theory or fiscal stimulus and our focus on these fiscal spending packages, there's a shift occurring. Fiscal authorities in the next 10 years or longer are going to, we think, take back more ownership of macro outcomes. And that is, I think, a structural, positive for inflation that's starting to brew. And, whether the market's pricing that or some more short-term impacts from consumer spending patterns and crude oil going higher and Fed on hold for years, hard to tell, but there's a few things lining up there.
Well, do you think, Ashok, that fuels the bullish impulse that exists in credit markets? You touched on that briefly a couple of minutes ago, and I think that's important. Back in 2018, when we had this huge group, this consensus view that risk assets were going to the moon and the short vol trade was on, what upset that was higher inflation because the prospect of higher interest rates came into the conversation. Ashok, we might not get a repeat of that through 21. So higher inflation, is that just more fuel for the bullish trade?
Right now it is, yeah. I think, the biggest driver of why credit spreads are here, certainly fundamentals are okay. I think that's one thing that's underappreciated is that companies have spent this year, we're not hearing stories about buybacks funded by debt. Company balance sheets are stable to improving this year. There's been, for bondholders, some good things occurring, but it's against the backdrop of a 0% funds rate, negative rates globally, and a market that believes, because of what the Fed's policy shift that happened in September means, that those zero rates are going to last for a long, long time, and that is causing a lot of needs for income and flowing into credit markets. So yes, what disturbs that? It's probably would be a combination of higher inflation, and then importantly, a belief that the Fed's promise for multiple years of 0% rates is no longer credible. But that is something, our view is that's a reasonable ways away still.
Well, it feels really, really difficult to try and generate any kind of story that spells out the idea of the Fed stepping back in and hiking interest rates anytime soon. Ashok, even if they don't participate in a bigger way next week by extending the average maturity of their asset purchase program, let me just finish with this. How difficult will it be for yields to carry on rising in the United States, given what we're seeing take place on the other side of the Atlantic with yields going the other way?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Jonathan. I mean, German yields are basically going nowhere at negative 50-odd basis points. And, as you know, there's been a big rally in periphery yields. So something like Italian yields are, hitting, all-time or recent lows. So the rise in U.S. rates has been diverging a little bit from some of the global markets. And there's one lesson of the last, post-GFC crisis, it's really hard for U.S. yields to get really disconnected from these overseas markets, and that is going to create, a cap, I think, on how high yields could go anytime soon.
60 basis points on the Italian 10-year this morning. Ashok, great to catch up. Send my best to the whole of the team, won't you? Ashok Bhatia there of Neuberger Berman. Coming up on this program, we'll get you some of the morning calls, then later, the look ahead to 2021. And the amount of crowding that we're already seeing, concentrated trades, groupthink. Is the groupthink becoming group action? We touched on that with Richard Bernstein a little bit earlier. We'll do that again with Keith Lerner. We'll do that next on Bloomberg. 5 minutes away from the opening bell in New York City this morning. Good morning to you all. We're down 8 on the S&P 500. We're down 0.2%. Let's get you some morning calls. First up from Bernstein, upgrading Southwest to an outperform $59 price target. The analyst expected the airline sector to see a firmer recovery by the end of 2021. Your second call comes from UBS, upgrading Boeing to a buy, doubling its price target to 300. The analyst citing positive vaccine developments and effective cost-cutting initiatives. That stock positive by 2.6%. And your third and final call, it comes from the team at Piper, upgrading Lyft to overweight, $61 price target. The analyst seeing the potential for 30% upside following a series of positive developments. That stock is up by 3.2% going into the opening bell. Coming up, beware of consensus calls and crowded trades. That conversation coming up shortly around the opening bell with Keith Lerner of Truist. For our audience worldwide this morning, good morning as we pull back just a little bit from all-time highs on the S&P 500, on the Russell. We add potentially to the record on the NASDAQ 100 on an 8-day winning streak. This is Bloomberg.
Really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
Record high, record high, record high. Coming into Monday on the NASDAQ, the S&P and the Russell. The Russell, 5-week winning streak. Unchanged going into the cash open. The S&P, 2-week winning streak. Down about 0.2% going into the opening bell. The NASDAQ, 2-week winning streak on the NASDAQ 108-day winning streak into Monday. We could add some weight to that. That's the opening bell. Switch up the board into the bond market we go. ECB Thursday, big focus here for fixed income and foreign exchange. Yields come in 2-3 basis points from the post-pandemic shock highs on the 10-year yield. from Friday's session. We come back to 0.94%. In the FX market, euro 121.38, clear underperformance in sterling. Cable gapping lower, 134 handle to start the day, took a sneak peek at 132. You know the Brexit story, it's never ending. In the commodity market, we're down 1% on crude, $45 and about 80 cents. That's the story of the markets cross-asset worldwide. At the market desk with your movers, here's Abigail.
John, it's Monday. We don't have new vaccine news, but we do have the vaccine makers popping even so. Let's take a look at Pfizer and Moderna. Both of these shares are higher. And of course, Pfizer's vaccine will be rolled out starting tomorrow in the UK. Around 1,000 doses will be released this week and then expand to many, many locations in the coming weeks. We see Moderna outperforming Pfizer and their vaccine not too far behind in terms of the rollout. Now, relative to tech stocks, interestingly, because we, of course, have a little bit of a movement away from banks and energy, so that cyclical trade fading at least right now. But we do have tech a little bit higher, led by Apple and the news that they're developing a super fast chip. Intel, on the other hand, falling on that. Relative to other stocks, Spirit Aerosystems is popping sharply higher as UBS has upgraded the stock to a buy. They've also upgraded Boeing, and this company does receive 61% of their revenue from Boeing. So with the 737 MAX getting back in the air, this stock is trading higher. Eastman Kodak absolutely soaring, up 73% on the news that a government inspector had found no wrongdoing by the company in receiving a $675 million loan to make COVID materials. So those investors are really cheering, and that stock has done many, many different purposes and businesses in the last few years. And then finally, Tesla, the stock that simply won't stop, John, a piece of that outperformance for the NASDAQ 100 and the all-time high 8-day winning streak, up 2.2%, up more than 46% since the news of its S&P 500 inclusion. The big question, John, is once that actually happens on December 21st, will we finally see some sort of sell the news action? Not right now, though.
I wonder if anyone's brave enough to be short, given what we've seen this year. Abigail, thank you. Thank you very much. About 2 minutes into this session, equities down 0.2%. Bottom of the pile, big energy, we're down about 2 percentage points. Financials down 0.7%. Curve flatter, yields lower. Compare that to last week. Opposite story. Banks up this morning, banks down. You've heard about the outlook for 2021. Small caps over large caps, cyclicals over defensives, value over growth, becoming quite concentrated, crowded. JP Morgan warning about this. They go on to say the following. They write the following, quote, regarding the 2021 outlook, a clear consensus has emerged, a bullish view on equities overall into 2021. Unfortunately, the consensus view rarely plays out in its entirety. For asset allocators, what is thus important is scale exposures to avoid an overly concentrated portfolio. For more on that, here's Kaylee Lyons. Hey, Kaylee.
Hey, John. Well, JP Morgan basically saying something you've called attention to quite often on this program recently, which is that strong consensus that is present in the markets at the moment. Almost everyone seemingly agreeing on where you should put your money. Now, JP Morgan saying the last time there was agreement that was this strong, it was back in late 2017, early 2018, and we all know what happened after that. Volmageddon, that consensus view didn't really play out in its entirety as expected. As a result, the strategist saying investors now need to hedge against those overly crowded trades. Among those trades that are crowded, they are pointing to short the dollar versus other cyclical developed market currencies, long copper and long Bitcoin. Again, that harkens back to late 2017. On the other hand, the less crowded side that the bank is pointing to, bullish positions on oil and gold, two commodities there, and also the emerging versus developed market equities trade. The strategist saying that overweight EM relative to DM, not too crowded yet. And as far as equities as a whole, they say that medium-term positioning appears to be average rather than overbought. When it all comes down to it, John, the crowdedness of some trades could simply be chalked up to the fact that there's not a lot of places to go right now. Bespoke put out some research pointing to the earnings yield on the S&P 500. That is now at the lowest since the dot-com era, all the way back in 2000. Usually that would be a warning sign, or it would be if there was another attractive alternative asset. But when you look at fixed income, U.S. benchmark 10-year yields still below 1%. Back in 2000, it was up at 6%. So that creates that nowhere else to go kind of scenario, John.
Kelly Lyons, thank you. Let's build on this. Sticking with consensus calls, investors increasingly growing bullish on equities and the Buy Europe story in 2021.
It's looking almost certain at this point that we do get a sharp recovery in the global economy in the second half of 2021.
It can make sense to look at Europe.
The momentum now for Eurozone COVID infections look as though it's slowing.
Policy support will be delivered in a much more straightforward fashion.
The story is a lot about sort of avoiding some of the risks that are specific to the U.S.
More lockdowns, more difficulty in terms of infections.
Those are still, unfortunately, getting worse in the United States.
Japan also is getting a look at broader Asia from our equity strategists, because these are areas that, again, haven't had to deal with as much in terms of the virus.
Europe is a part of that story.
The virus will influence the first quarter. That could potentially favor Eurozone over U.S. Over the coming 12 months.
There's just more upside on that recovery story.
Keith Lerner of Truist going against the grain. He's favouring the US. He writes the following: we retain an equity bias relative to fixed income with a US tilt. We upgraded our tactical view of small caps recently and would view pullbacks as opportunities to position for the year ahead. Relative valuations appear very attractive. Comparative earnings and price trends are rising and sector composition is supportive. Keith joins us now for more. Keith, can you just walk us through that US tilt just a little bit more, please?
Sure. Hey, John. Great to be with you. And, we think it's too early to give up on the U.S. The first thing, think from an economic perspective, we went down a lot less than other countries around the globe, and we're likely to get back to full GDP by the end of 2021. With some of these countries in Europe, it's going to take 2023, 2024 before we get back to, pre-pandemic levels. And then the other side, just earnings. It's, at this point, as far as with the international side, it's show me the money, because right now the relative earning trends for the U.S. still remains much stronger relative to Europe. Now, don't get me wrong, John. I think we have a global recovery. We've been bullish since really May, and we still think we're in a multi-year bull market, and we think it's going to be a global bull market. But as we look into next year, we don't want to give up on the U.S. quite yet. And the other point you mentioned, I think there's other ways to play this reflation trade. And what you just highlighted, Jonathan, one of our favorite ideas over the next year is U.S. small caps. And if you think about this recent rally where you saw international outperform, well, the small caps, specifically the S&P 600, actually was on par with the 20% plus rise that we saw in Europe.
What I keep hearing, though, Keith, is this word early. It's early. It's the early stage recovery. It's the early part of the bull market. It's early, but the Russell's already at a record. The Nasdaq's already at a record. The S&P 500 is already at a record. And I talked about this a couple of hours ago on TV and radio, Keith, and I wonder what your perspective on that is. How it's simultaneously both early, but also an equity market that's already at a record high.
Yeah, let me give you my perspective on that. First, we do think we're in the early stage of an economic recovery, probably just several months into what we would expect to be a multi-year economic recovery. Normally, the average expansion in the U.S. is over 5 years. However, this is important. This is a distinction. The first phase of the bull market tends to be the strongest, and that tends to happen before the recession is over. So we think we're moving to the next stage of the bull market, which is where you start to see much more moderate returns, still positive, some more bumps along the way as well. But there is that distinction that the strongest part of a bull market tends to happen at the onset. And so far, this bull market looks very similar to 2009. And then if you remember in 2010, that was still a relatively good year. It's just you had 2 steps forward, 1 step back along the way. And that's what we think we'll see for next year.
Keith, always great to catch up with you, sir, and appreciate getting your outlook with a little bit of a different flavour, a US tilt towards US small caps over, say, Europe, which is becoming a consensus trade quite quickly at the moment. Keith Lerner of Truist, thank you, sir. I want to head back to the market desk, checking on this market this Monday morning. Here's Abigail.
John, let's take a look at the fact that the cyclical trade is coming off just a little bit this morning, not in a massive way, but the biggest drags on the S&P 500, not surprisingly then, coming from energy and the banks. Take a look at Chevron, down 3% in sympathy with oil lower. You could really make the case, though, this is just a cooling off of the huge rally this quarter so far, up about 30%, the energy sector. So investors taking some chips off the table. Banks down, Citigroup down in particular, down 2%. Of course, the yield curve is flattening a little bit today. Yields are coming in as bonds are rallying. A little bit of a risk-off tone overall. So again, that is hitting the cyclical reopening reflation sectors. On the other hand, you do have this year's defense, tech, Apple and Microsoft trading higher. Apple also getting a boost from the fact that they are developing a super fast chip for their Mac that may even outperform outperform Intel. As for the top stock from a percentage standpoint for the S&P 500 today, that is Boeing. Shares are up sharply, up 4.1% on an upgrade from UBS to buy from neutral. That analyst saying that the vaccine is sparking an aero cycle. So there we have Boeing up 4%, John, as the 737 MAX fleet is getting back into the air.
Some good news for that company over the last week. Abigail, thank you. Coming up, China's recovery gaining momentum. Export data out this morning. Absolutely stellar. The politics, though. Will the politics actually change? That conversation's up next with Goldman Sachs. Looking forward to catching up with Christian Muller-Glitzman very shortly. This is Bloomberg.
Somebody, any head of state in the world, how hard is it for you to get anybody on the phone? I assume not too hard.
I would say it's not too hard, but sometimes it takes a week.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise, but also the waves. The significant wave height, which is the top 1/3 of the waves, if you were to look at them in time.
Sea level rise is accelerating, and it is not geographically uniform. In some regions, the rate of rise is 2 to 3 times faster than the global mean. This means that in this region, the elevation since the beginning of the 90s is now nearly 30 centimeters, which is not negligible.
China went back to its pre-COVID GDP already in the second quarter or so, and has since continued to recover quite robustly. And the export numbers are very encouraging, because what we see is that the export performance is not only in those COVID-related areas where there are certain goods that that were demanded during COVID have been doing well, but also broader. And that is China is doing very well.
About China's recovery after exports jumped in November by the most since 2018. This amid reports that the US is preparing its latest round of sanctions over tensions in Hong Kong. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman warning Beijing would take countermeasures if the US continues down what they call the wrong path. They say the following: if the reports are true, I believe you can imagine China's position. We firmly oppose and strongly condemn U.S. interference in China's internal affairs and sanctions on Chinese personnel under the pretext of Hong Kong. We have expressed our positions to the U.S. side many times. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's international economics and policy correspondent, Mike McKee. Hey, Mike.
Hey, John, let me explain this to you in terms that you in particular could understand. Imagine a Chinese version of Larry Kudlow walking into whatever shaped office the president there has and says, President Xi, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is China's exports jumped in November by the most since early 2018. The trade surplus is at a record high. Chinese companies shipped $268 billion in goods in November. That's the most for any single month, more than 21% higher than the same month last year. But import growth fell to 4.5%, leaving a trade surplus of $75.4 billion. That's the largest on record in records going back to 1990. As Mr. Keller said, exports of medical equipment, the biggest thing that went overseas in exports, and shipments of electronics also as retailers stock up for the holiday. So the president turns and says, okay, Mr. Economic Advisor, what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is this widening trade surplus could put further upward pressure on the yuan, which has already appreciated more than 6% against the dollar this year. They could weaken the yuan, but every time they do, the U.S. and Europe jump all over them. Do they want to go through that? China's trade surplus with the United States, meanwhile, reaches a new monthly record, $37.4 billion in November, despite Beijing promising to ramp up imports from the U.S. as part of that Phase 1 trade deal. The latest data show China nowhere near meeting its commitments. President-elect Joe Biden recently said he wouldn't quickly remove the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. He's going to consult the allies before developing a China strategy. Meanwhile, Trump still president for another month and a half, and he's preparing sanctions, as you said, to hit a dozen more Chinese officials over their roles in Hong Kong. The latest round of sanctions over Hong Kong could come out as early as today. The U.S. has already hit officials there, of course, with a number of sanctions, including the city's chief executive, Carrie Lam. So more tensions to go along with higher trade deficits. China's economy is doing better, but its relationship with the United States and the rest of the world, not as great.
And unbelievably, as Carrie Lam herself pointed out, Carrie Lam can't even get a bank account in Hong Kong right now and has to get paid in cash. Just unreal. Mike, thank you. And as we talked about last week, for anyone talking down the structural power of the US dollar, doesn't that just underline how powerful the US dollar still is? You can have a cyclical call on the US dollar, but a structural shift away from the US dollar, given the fact of how powerful sanctions are around the greenback, unreal. Christian Muller-Ginsman of Goldman Sachs expecting a sustained rotation without a supporting reflation trade. He writes the following: we expect real yield curves to steepen in 2021 and prefer non-US to US equities over the next 3 months, as they should be bigger beneficiaries of a continued pro-cyclical rotation, especially if bond yields rise. Christian joins us now for more. Christian, let's just start with the time frame for that call of non-US equities. A lot of people are going with a 12-month time horizon. You went with 3, and I don't want to get myopic about the situation, but why the shorter time frame for you, Christian?
Yeah, no, I think we have currently that perfect backdrop where global growth is, recovering from very low levels. You have bond yields that have not moved much. They've completely lagged in this rotation. And in the long run, you always face the question marks with regards to the structural growth potential which the US has. So you're competing with, like, you could say, a kind of trend growth, which on the corporate level is much better. So I think over the 12-month horizon, we decided to be relatively neutral across regions. But the window right now with like global growth recovery, bond yields having lagged materially, and we don't really expect them to go up a lot, but there is at least a chance that they go up a bit. I think that all kind of feeds a bit more into non-US equities tactically.
Christian, let's just build on that then. Beyond the tactical 3-month call, what you expect to see over the 9 months after that, because you've seen the same outlooks that I've seen, I imagine, the 12-month outlook, rest of the world over the United States. Why are you neutral? And neutral now, Christian, I've got to say, is a little bit of a contrarian call, given how much I've read of the same thing in the last few weeks. Why neutral, Christian?
Yeah, just to be clear, we're overweight equities over 12 months. It's just within equities, we're a bit more neutral on the regions. Yeah. I think generally, I think the important thing going forward is you're facing still unprecedented political and policy uncertainty. And I think at the margin, that's just very difficult to predict, as we know from painful experience. And that's why I think political risk is likely to be more local. So international diversification can help you with that. So I think near term, we see very little political risk in Europe outside of course, Brexit. But I think we at least don't have any debt sustainability concerns. We have a very supportive ECB backdrop. We have a meeting this week where we expect a 400 billion increase in PEP purchases. So from that perspective, you have a good backdrop there. And I think the further out you go, the more uncertainty increases. So we prefer to be more broadly diversified. And just to be clear, if you do look in dollar terms, the 12-month return potential for most of the markets is pretty similar because we expect a weaker dollar. So from that perspective, it net expects there's very little return differentials.
Christian, let's just build on a couple of dynamics here. You've got this call on real yields. Can you just walk me through the corresponding correlation with, say, the US over Europe or Europe over the US and the sensitivity of the two markets to that theme?
Yeah, I mean, this is a new dynamic which we have written about, which is that the US equity market has become much longer duration. If you look this year, you've seen a major decline in real yields, of course, to minus 1%, one of the most negative levels which we've seen since the TIPS market exists. And that has been particularly a boost for long duration secular growth stocks and has really weighed the S&P 500 both via index rebalancing, but just performance towards these longer duration structural growers. And as a result of that, we think the US equity market is particularly sensitive to higher rates, in particular higher real rates. And I think what we would expect is that over the course of the growth recovery, that you get steeper kind of real yield curves, steeper nominal rate curves, and at the margin, initially, the increase in longer dated real yields should be relatively gradual. And actually, a lot of the steepening might be driven by the front end. But there's always a risk that, especially towards the middle of next year, when you do get growth being much stronger, that you do get the back end move as well. And I think that risk for equities is much bigger. I give you an example. In the last 3 months, the beta of the NASDAQ to 10-year yields has actually turned negative. It's not been negative for the whole last cycle. So usually higher bond yields in the US have been good for equities because they have signaled better growth. But by virtue of these very elevated valuations for tech stocks, which have been boosted by lower yields, increasingly the equity market isn't benefiting from higher rates anymore. They become a real drag.
Christian, really smart and great to get you on the program. It's been too long, sir. Come back soon. Christian Müller-Glissman there of Goldman Sachs. Thank you, sir. Coming up on this program, the week ahead, as we count you down to an ECB decision on Thursday. More to come. This is Bloomberg.
I think what we're seeing during this period of time is that Communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
Let's get you the trading diary. There's the price action. Here's what you need to be watching this week. President Donald Trump planning to host a vaccine summit on Tuesday. U.S. wholesale inventories coming on Wednesday. Thursday, we get an ECB rate decision and President Christine Lagarde news conference. That's going to be fascinating on Thursday. I've got to say, they want you to focus on the duration of bond buying. This market's usually focused on size. What's the size of the package going to look like? Thursday, we also get another round of initial jobless claims and U.S. CPI figures, PPI, and the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey to close out the week on Friday. That's your week ahead. About 26 minutes into the session, let's get a check on a price action for you in the United States, worldwide. Equities at all-time highs in Friday's session on the S&P, the NASDAQ, and the Russell. We pull back on the S&P just a little bit, down 0.2%. The NASDAQ is putting together quite a run. 9 straight days of gains, potentially, on the NASDAQ 100 as we add to the all-time highs. For our audience worldwide, this was the Countdown to the Open. I'm Jonathan Ferro. Catch me on Twitter at FerroTV. We'll be back with you tomorrow around the opening bout. This is Bloomberg.
We have some good news in terms of vaccines and a chance to overcome the health crisis, but we are not there yet.
We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly, because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
What we need surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures, because you have no other way at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
We don't just need more investment in public health. We must also rethink how we value health.
I do believe a targeted fiscal stimulus is going to be in order to really begin a more equalized economy.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. Experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored island-wide. Much of the blame has been placed on FEMA for a slow response in comparison to recent disasters on the mainland. But recovery from a disaster of this complexity and scale has proven more challenging than anyone anticipated. And filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan, and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's most isolated and vulnerable residents. Steve Berenbaum is one of Anderson's business associates. He offered an extra car and a set of hands.
So we received an initial report from a nurse that was out in the area. We're headed to the northeast region of Utuado for some people that are in need of urgent medical assistance.
Dr. Sally Priester is a physician from San Juan. She filled a van with medical supplies at her own expense and brought along a team of nurses. Google Maps estimated our first destination to be a 90-minute drive. But it didn't account for obstacles like this. Our first stop was the home of an 82-year-old blind Vietnam veteran. His roof was blown off by the storm, and he's been living alone in a back shed for nearly 2 months.
His cane actually got broken in the storm, so he's limited mobility. He has a number of medical ailments. Dr. Priester's having a look at him. We called the VA. They're going to get him set up with what he needs, get him stabilized so he can then be transported either to an evacuation center or off the island. It's when the chain gets broken, when those families that are connected to them leave the island or take off. These guys get left at the end of the road, and it's tough.
FEMA was not officially part of Robert's team, and their arrival caught everyone by surprise. Their job here was to survey and report back to their superiors, and did not come with medical aid of any kind.
People think that FEMA is there to hand out bottles of water. It's not what they do. FEMA has a role to play. They have a very specific role. They bring in ships, they bring in airplanes, they bring in tractor trailers with pallets of things. But they're a big machine, and there's gaps in that thing. And you're seeing one of the gaps here, and we help fill that role. These guys are in a bad situation before, and now they're struggling for real basic things. One of the risks that you run is people going from fear to hopelessness. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach.
And how are they reached? How are they even found?
Word of mouth, mostly.
And what's your role in all this?
Ghost in the machine. I'm lucky enough to be able to communicate with folks in FEMA, the state of Puerto Rico.
For a ghost, Robert makes his presence well known. Not only was he the de facto leader of the mission, now with FEMA in tow, he created his own maps to survey storm damage.
So we're right here.
And delivered them to FEMA HQ free of charge.
I have pretty good reach.
Perhaps that's how he managed to earn himself a coveted FEMA badge without actually working for them. And it's these relationships that allow him to operate more efficiently than an NGO or a government agency.
We're able to resolve problems at a different level.
Our next stop was on a mountaintop, a family of 11 struggling to care for their special needs brother in what was left of their house.
Probably we are the first health team to come and visit this family.
Muy bien, todo muy bien.
The patient has Down syndrome. He is all day in bed. The difficulty with this is the patient cannot be alone. The most important thing is that you need to take care of the chronic disease besides disability, because they have been not going to a doctor, and no doctor has come in here yet.
So we need a refill of this medication.
After maybe 54 days, it's not getting better. And the only way that you can be able to see that is coming to the ground, drive, and see the people and talk to the people.
You can see San Juan from here, but you can't get there. It's like the Emerald City.
On this stop, we caught word that a man living alone at the edge of the jungle was in need of care.
So we decided to take a little detour, come up here and check out and see what's going on. One of the challenges is to find those people that are at the end of these roads that need help.
¿Pero por qué estás solo? ¿Por qué estás por acá tan solo? I'm asking about why he's alone right here. He said things of life happens. Yeah, I'm here by myself. So ¿dónde vive acá? En la parte de... This is not a job. To do this, you need to have passion for what you can do. You're not going to get paid.
It's said in disaster response and emergency response that the real first responders are your neighbors. You don't need to wait for a lucrative FEMA contract to go out and do good and to help the community.
In the end, do you feel like you're making a difference?
Lives you touch and people that you can affect. I don't really think about it in those terms.
But why do you do it?
It helps me sleep at night. I think it's as much for the people that are going out to help and do things as it is for the people that you affect.
Whether out of altruism, or the lure of a paid gig, or some mixture of the two, Anderson hopes to stay here to help shape Puerto Rico's future.
Puerto Rico's essentially been a colony for 400 years. It was treated poorly by the Spanish. It was not treated well by the United States when they first got here. Puerto Rico can continue in the way that it's always been, or Puerto Rico can rebuild itself like nothing that's ever been. And we have to do everything we can to make that real. That's the bottom line.
When I met him first online, I found him to be really sweet. I think I was the one who was talking for an hour. He was just listening.
When we met, I saw her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, which was, something that I was looking for.
Anshu and Sumit are one of about 12 million couples that get married in India every year. Unlike their parents' generation, they're not from two close villages, but from two cities on opposite sides of the country. And their love didn't start through community matchmaking, marriage brokers, or classified ads in newspapers, but began online.
So we met through jeevansathi.com. So it's basically an online portal where we have detailed profile of different grooms and brides.
It makes a lot of remote profiles who are located in distant areas more accessible.
Thanks to growing internet and smartphone usage, matrimony websites and apps in India are starting to disrupt the matchmaking industry. More and more people are finding their partners at the click of a mouse. jeevansathi.com, where Anshu and Sumit met, is one of the biggest players. Young Indians looking for love set up profiles including their caste and horoscope, but their criteria for choosing spouses appears to be changing.
We have seen the shift from traditional caste community conservative parameters to something like which is more focused on education, employment.
Anshu and Sumit's marriage was initiated by their parents, but modern Indian couples like them have more input than previous generations.
We looked up to them to agree for the proposal, but it was primarily our decision that we wanted to be with each other.
So what's the emoji like you use the most to send to each other?
There's a bear which basically we use for indicating a hug.
Yeah, that's our language basically, bear icon for a hug.
Time flies when you're in love, and just 1.5 months after they first met online, the couple got engaged. They decided to hold their wedding less than 3 months later. But planning a traditional Hindu wedding on such short notice is no easy task. The massive event usually lasts 3 days, has various ceremonies and celebrations, and involves the entire two families and hundreds of guests. Luckily, there are websites and apps for that.
We searched online, we got in touch with Wedding Brigade, and they helped us finalize the venue. And it makes the search faster and efficient.
Startups like the Wedding Brigade are challenging traditional wedding planners in this $50 billion industry. It provides various services from booking banquet venues to buying wedding gowns. The website makes money by charging commission from vendors.
People don't want to be limited to what is available around them. They want to know the entire range of options available before making a decision. And now it's easy to find almost everything on one portal.
Anshu and Sumit are officially married in a ritual that has gone on for thousands of years, but their love started in a very new way. Technologies might be changing the way couples meet, date, and get married in India, but they're definitely not changing everything.
The technology was only the first level help that we could get to find each other. Everything else was like very humanly and emotions and feelings based.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become a symbol of everything the Republican Party stands against.
Everyone gets a right to basic health care. We need strong oversight of these banks.
A legal scholar and a consumer advocate turned politician, Warren has branded herself as a champion of the working class and made a career out of standing up to big business. While rumors of a 2020 presidency bid remain just that,
I'm not running for president.
Her Senate seat is up for re-election in 2018, and Republicans are already pumping millions into super PACs to defeat her. This is the story of how a law professor and politician came to be seen as the biggest threat to Republican values and the greatest hope for progressive America. Elizabeth Warren was born Elizabeth Ann Herron, the youngest of 3 siblings, on June 22, 1949 in Oklahoma City to middle-class parents. After waiting tables to help her family pay the bills, Warren became a star on the high school debate team. She landed a scholarship to George Washington University at the age of 16, but 2 years later dropped out to marry her high school sweetheart, Jim Warren. By 1980, Warren was a mother of 2, divorced and remarried, had earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, a juris degree from Rutgers, and practicing law in New Jersey. Warren then went on to become an influential law professor, teaching, lecturing, and publishing highly cited work on bankruptcy and commercial law at 7 universities around the country, eventually settling at Harvard Law School. But Warren wasn't always a liberal lion.
Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican, actually.
That's Stephen Dennis.
I'm a Senate reporter for Bloomberg. Around the time that Elizabeth Warren switched parties, she became a fierce opponent of a Republican drive to make it much harder to file for bankruptcy. She fought that for a decade. It ended up passing anyways.
While her efforts ultimately failed, her warning calls were heard in 2008.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Our entire economy is in danger, and without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold.
Professor Warren was tapped to help with oversight in the government bailout.
She would excoriate bankers and their bonuses and their practices.
Why should the U.S. taxpayer alone carry Citi?
She proposed a series of tough regulations, which became the basis for much of the Dodd-Frank financial law that we have today. That sort of catapulted her to national stardom, particularly among the progressive left.
Encouraged by her newfound notoriety, Warren declared her bid for the U.S. Senate on September 14, 2011. During the race, her opponent Scott Brown tried to derail Warren by accusing her of falsely claiming Native American heritage, a controversy that earned her the nickname Pocahontas. Nevertheless, she was victorious and won the Senate seat by a comfortable margin. She used her new tenure to challenge everyone, from banking regulators and Treasury officials to members of Wall Street and Congress.
I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable. No one should be above the law.
She called for Wells Fargo CEO John Stump to resign for fraud, introduced the Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, and reintroduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. In 2016, after staying silent during the Democratic primary battle, Warren finally endorsed Hillary Clinton and had some harsh words for candidate Trump.
Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone, and that is just one of the many reasons he will never be president of the United States.
But she was wrong.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Warren wasted no time resisting Trump's agenda.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
Okay. In the Donald Trump era, Elizabeth Warren has been playing defense and trying to prevent Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees from rolling back protections that she helped enact.
Warren actually found herself rebuked by Mitch McConnell for reading a letter by Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions' record on racism during his confirmation.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
that moment became something that's on T-shirts, bumper stickers, slogans, and that really galvanized a lot of support for her. It's been very hard for Republicans to get much of anything done this year, and that's at least in part to this resistance movement that Elizabeth Warren has helped champion.
We are here to fight back.
Enough of Elizabeth Warren. Like you.
Millions of dollars are being funneled to defeat Warren in the midterm elections in 2018. But it's the rumors of a 2020 presidential bid that has further prompted powerful donors to fund her opposition, often using the same playbook of constant and ruthless ad campaigns that many believe helped Trump win in 2016. It's anyone's guess if she will endure what Hillary could not.
You know, the question for Elizabeth Warren is whether she can go from being a liberal firebrand to somebody who can regularly get 60 votes for initiatives in the Senate and 218 in the House and drive an agenda, and whether she can bring together coalitions for political victories. That's the challenge, and we'll see what happens.
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has made some powerful opponents.
He doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements.
My message to Donald Trump and his team is that, your views of Islam are ignorant.
He's the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital and proud of it. This is how Sadiq Khan went from the son of Pakistani immigrants to a lawyer, lawmaker, and now the mayor of London. Khan's parents emigrated from Pakistan. His father was a bus driver, his mother a stay-at-home seamstress. The 10-strong Khan family squeezed into a 3-bedroom flat in South London. He wanted to be a dentist, but TV in the 1980s convinced him otherwise.
Objection!
LA law with its swagger and ill-fitting suits caught Khan's eye. He graduated in 1991 with a degree in law from North London University and joined a human rights firm. Khan worked a number of high-profile cases, often clashing with London's Metropolitan Police Force. But he had bigger political ambitions.
This is what being a new MP is like, squatting on a bench in the absence of an office, dealing with letters from constituents.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion here in London.
So there's just explosions, and then it was just smoke everywhere.
Everyone's just asking what's happened.
Only 2 months after Khan entered the Commons as a Member of Parliament, London was attacked by Islamist extremists.
That day will stay with me for the rest of my life.
He spoke out against the attacks both as a London MP and as a Muslim.
He has been very clear about his opposition to violence, opposition to terrorism, and has set out to make the case for a more open and peaceful Islam.
That's Thomas Penny, one of Bloomberg's Westminster correspondents.
Here is a man who is a Muslim, and he is standing up and being open and straightforward and being clear that the problem here is not Islam, but it's Islamic extremism.
In 2015, a decade after the attacks, Khan ran for mayor of London, and his faith was back in the headlines. His opponent, Zach Goldsmith, trying to link Khan to radical Islam.
The debate got again personal and nasty. The Goldsmith camp has called Khan extreme and accused him of associating with, quote, those who seek to do our police and capital harm.
It's a pattern of behaviour.
Even the former Prime Minister David Cameron repeated the allegations.
He shared a platform with Sajil Shahid, the man who trained the ringleader of the 7/7 attacks and accused the United States of bringing 9/11 on themselves.
But the smears didn't stick.
Zach Goldsmith ran a very negative campaign that was based on what people knew was a lie.
This election was not without controversy. And I'm so proud that London has today chosen hope over fear and unity over division.
After taking the mayor's office with a comfortable majority, Khan has brought a business-like efficiency to the role, scrapping expensive vanity projects like the Garden Bridge and the new Routemaster buses, which cost £350,000 each. The former lawyer who used to fight the police in court is now praised for his close relationship with them.
I was talking to a very senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police who said there was a sea change when he went into City Hall, and the police were saying how much they welcomed this because they knew where they stood and it was more straightforward to work with. So he works like a lawyer, he works like a government minister.
Khan's kept his faith at the fore. He's an outspoken voice for moderate Muslims across the world.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, by giving the impression that Islam and the West are incompatible, you're playing into the hands of the extremists.
The ongoing spat between Khan and US President Donald Trump escalated when Trump went after Khan, misquoting him on Twitter just hours after the terrorist attacks of June 3rd, 2017. Khan's now one of the most prominent Labour politicians in the UK. In fact, a recent poll of Londoners found Khan was more trusted to keep the country safe from terrorism than the Prime Minister or the Labour leader. His story of going from the son of an immigrant bus driver to the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the world plays well with Londoners. But can he appeal to the rest of the nation? Has Khan got his eye on the top job? And is the UK ready for a Muslim Prime Minister?
What does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning. He used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped at the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness.
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks!
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
When it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there, not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
People think of Vladimir Putin, they think of capital P, power. And that's exactly the impression he creates. Whether it's physical power, firing different weapons, riding in various James Bond-esque modes of transportation, or tossing hapless opponents in judo. Or political power, ruling his own country with an iron fist, crushing his political opposition, or, most recently, being accused of meddling in foreign elections for his own benefit. This is how Vladimir Putin went from a poor, tough kid in Leningrad to a KGB spy to the very symbol of modern Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. His father was a factory foreman and his mother a homemaker. It is widely said that Putin's public-facing tough guy persona can be traced back to him getting into fights when he was younger, which paved the way for him to take up judo. After getting a law degree from Leningrad State University, Putin joined the KGB Foreign Intelligence Service. He spent 16 years in the KGB. When Putin returned to Russia, he began his political career.
He went to work for Anatoly Sobchak, who was then the mayor of St. Petersburg.
That's Leonid Bershidsky.
I'm a columnist at Bloomberg View.
Putin thrived in Sobchak's administration because
he was sort of considered pretty efficient city official at that time. He was very loyal to Sobchak.
So loyal and efficient that
he was noticed by Yeltsin's close circle.
And those people soon brought Putin over to Moscow to work in Yeltsin's administration, where he quickly climbed the political ladder.
Then, of course, he was promoted to Prime Minister of Russia.
That's Dmitry Trenin.
I am currently director of the Carnegie Moscow Center.
Around this time, Yeltsin and the people around him, the so-called family, decided that Putin would become Yeltsin's successor. And then this happened. The apartment bombings were carried out in 3 Russian cities, killing 293 people and injuring more than 1,000. Putin immediately accused Chechen separatists for the bombings and followed it up with action.
He was credited with having a very successful military campaign against the terrorists.
And it worked.
After that, he became an heir apparent in the eyes of the Russian people.
3 months later, Yeltsin resigned. And on his way out, a famous exchange.
He was getting into the car in the Kremlin, and the last words that he addressed to Putin before getting into his car was, "Take good care of Russia."
So Putin took over as president, and 3 months after that, won his first election. But just because Putin won the presidency, that didn't mean he had all the power. This is Michael McFall.
I was U.S. ambassador from 2012 to 2014. In the 1990s, there was a fire sale of all the things worth owning in Russia, and certain people,
the oligarchs,
did better than others in that fire sale, sometimes called privatization, and those people tended to be well connected with the Yeltsin regime, and they weren't Putin's friends.
But they probably miscalculated, thinking that they could easily find a way to influence him. It became impossible almost from the start. From that very moment, there was warfare between him and the oligarchs.
That's when Putin gave the oligarchs a choice. Putin's way?
Some of those people from the 90s managed to figure out a new way of dealing with Putin and have survived.
Or prison.
Others could not find common vision, and so they lost their assets.
Khodorkovsky once was Russia's richest person, worth $15 billion, but he ran afoul of President Vladimir Putin and spent a decade in prison.
With domestic power consolidated, Putin focused on restoring Russia's global influence.
Putin is the guy who believes in the expansionist Russian state. Georgia and Ukraine and all the other Soviet republics that split off when the Soviet Union fell apart, he still believes that they're traditional Russian satellites. A lot of his strategy is about keeping them in the orbit. That Yeltsin line, take good care of Russia, that's how he understands it.
And he used annexation and invasion, as well as oil, gas, and trade to keep former Soviet republics in Russia's orbit. In 2008, Putin's 2 terms were up, and he decided to step down as president. Dmitry Medvedev stepped in as president, and Putin went back to prime minister. But really,
Putin never left power. He pretty much continued running the country, and Medvedev was a bit of a figurehead.
There was actually a period of cooperation between Russia and the U.S. that benefited both countries during Medvedev's presidency.
Because Medvedev did not have the same negative attitude towards the West as Putin did.
But when Putin came back to run for a 3rd term, in the lead up to the 2012 election, it was widely believed that both the presidential and parliamentary elections were rigged, and Russians took to the streets. Putin blamed the protests squarely on America, and more specifically, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
He believed that she had sent, and this is his words, a signal to demonstrators.
Still, Putin won by a huge margin and set about crushing the protest movement immediately upon his return to the Kremlin. Over the next few years, Russia's economy tumbled. Putin annexed Crimea, leading to sanctions. The price of oil fell drastically. The ruble hit a new low, and America played down Russia's influence, with Obama calling Russia a regional power. Despite all of that, Putin's approval rating remained sky high, and then an opportunity for payback.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
In 2016, there was one candidate who called Vladimir Putin very smart.
Trump exhibited tolerance towards Putin's actions annexing Crimea, and similar views on NATO and sanctions.
Secretary Clinton didn't support any of those views.
Even though Putin denies any wrongdoing,
U.S. elections.
Yes.
the U.S. has accused Russia of being behind the leaking of 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails, which many say helped Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Which leaves us here, with the possibility of a President Putin until 2024, positioning Russia to be the world power he always imagined it should be.
Jack Ma is Asia's richest man and most recognizable business tycoon. He's the chairman of Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant and one of the 10 largest companies in the world. Yet he still wants more.
We know where we're going. We want to be the 5th largest economy.
Big words from the man some call Asia's Jeff Bezos. He's confident, he's charismatic, and he's definitely not the average CEO. This is how a poor school teacher went from the classroom to being one of the most influential multi-billionaires in the world. Ma was born in China's southeastern city Hangzhou in 1964. His parents were traditional musician storytellers. As a teenager, he started to learn English from foreign tourists after China opened up in the late 1970s.
And then for 9 years, Jack Ma hung around outside the Hangzhou Hotel, which is now called the Shangri-La. He would get up at 5 a.m. to talk to travelers.
That's Bloomberg technology reporter Lulu Chen.
And I cover China Internet for Bloomberg.
Ma failed China's National University entrance exam twice before being admitted to local teachers' college. He graduated in 1988. He applied for 30 jobs and got rejected, including from the fast food giant KFC.
When KFC came to China, capital say, 24 people went for the job. 24 these 3 people accepted. I was the only guy.
Then Ma got a job at a local university and taught English there for about 5 years, earning just $15 a month. On the side, he started a translation company with several friends. During a company trip to the US in 1995, Ma had his first encounter with the internet at a friend's place in Seattle.
I searched the first word, beer. I don't know why, because it's easy to spell, baby. And I see beers from Germany, beers from USA, beers from Japan, but there's no beer from China.
So he searched for the word China instead and still couldn't find anything. And that got him thinking. He wanted to build something that would put China on the world's map.
He started China Pages, a Yellow Pages-like website, but it didn't take off. Then Ma joined a government agency in Beijing to help set up a website. By 1999, the internet stock boom had gripped Wall Street, and back in his Hangzhou apartment, Ma decided to try again. With his wife and a group of friends, Ma raised $80,000 and set up Alibaba, a site that allowed businesses to sell stuff to each other.
人家美国人强就强它的硬件，强就强它的系统建设，这方面确实比你早。但是玩信息玩软的，中国人的脑袋绝不比你长。我们在座的所有人的脑袋绝不比你们长。
By 2000, Alibaba had raised $25 million from investors, including Goldman Sachs and SoftBank.
He had no business plan and zero revenue, but his eyes was very strong eyes.
In 2003, Alibaba started Taobao, a platform for individual sellers to trade with each other, and publicly declared war against eBay, who had started to make a foray into China.
Jack Ma has this famous saying that Alibaba is a crocodile in the Yangtze River, whereas eBay is a shark in the ocean. And if they fight eBay in the ocean, then they'll lose. But if they fight them in the Yangtze River, then they have a home base advantage.
In 2007, just 1 year after it forced eBay out of China, Alibaba debuted its business-facing division on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. But it delisted 5 years later as its performance sagged. But in 2014, Alibaba raised $25 billion in the world's biggest IPO in New York.
Everybody should have a dream. What if that dream comes true?
After achieving dominance in the business of e-commerce in China, Alibaba has been building an internet empire worth $472 billion, with businesses in cloud computing, online video streaming, movie production, healthcare, sports, retail, and even news media.
Alibaba buying into South China Morning Post really raised eyebrows. This is the largest English newspaper in Hong Kong, and it shows that Jack Ma's ambitions weren't limited to e-commerce. He wanted to influence not just Chinese users, but also overseas users as well.
The US has criticized Alibaba for allowing companies to sell counterfeit and poorly made goods, but in China, it enjoys the favor of China's government. It's part of Ma's company philosophy.
In love with the government, but don't marry with them.
Jack Ma is an extremely fortunate man for jumping on the internet sector so early. Note that this is a person who has no coding skills at all. He's a natural showman and a gifted public speaker and really able to convince others to believe in his vision.
Ma's vision of growing Alibaba to be the world's 5th largest economy faces strong competition at home and abroad. It will require more than just naked ambition and charisma, but Ma is great at getting himself in the right place at the right time. So far, it served him well.
Peter Thiel is a walking contradiction. He got his bachelor's and Juris Doctorate from Stanford, but speaks out about the horrors of higher education, saying college is
as corrupt as the Catholic Church was 500 years ago.
He's a staunch supporter of the free press, yet he bankrolled a lawsuit to bankrupt an independent media company.
But these were not journalists.
And most of all, he's an immigrant and libertarian who's the most public supporter of Donald Trump in all of Silicon Valley.
What Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away.
This is the story of how an openly gay, immigrant genius, libertarian billionaire went from tech contrarian to Silicon Valley's biggest Trump supporter. Peter Thiel was born on October 11, 1967 in Frankfurt, West Germany, to Suzanne and Klaus Thiel. Peter's family emigrated to Cleveland, Ohio when he was 1. An Ayn Rand devotee during his youth, Thiel attended Stanford University majoring in philosophy.
His Stanford experience shaped a really big part of who he decided to surround himself with.
That's Lizette Chapman.
And I cover technology and venture capital here at Bloomberg.
He and his Stanford friends made their first big splash in tech with PayPal. After selling to eBay for $1.5 billion, they would become known as the PayPal Mafia for each incredible success after PayPal. For Thiel, that began with an early, modest $500,000 investment in Facebook.
And in VC speak, early means big risk, but also big reward. He turned that initial $500,000 investment into more than $1 billion in cash.
But Thiel was just getting started with Facebook, and he went on to make a whole bunch of wildly successful investments.
From SpaceX to Airbnb to one of the largest, most powerful companies in the United States, if not the world, and of course that's Palantir.
The incredibly controversial secretive data mining startup he founded with his colleagues from PayPal. It connects data silos and then allows non-technical people to search that information for patterns. Data like
financial information, feeds from video cameras, biometric details, passport information, flight manifest.
Palantir doesn't talk much about how they collect this data, who has access to it, or what they do with it. But they have contracts with
the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA and the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission
and several other federal agencies. It's the richest company you've never heard of, valued at $20 billion. But there are plenty of obscenely wealthy people in Silicon Valley. What makes him different...
He's a complex ball of multiple contradictions.
Take college, for example. Even though college was extremely important for Thiel, there's something called the Thiel Fellowship.
In exchange for dropping out and a promise not to pursue college, Thiel would give them $100,000 each.
You basically tell people that if you get a diploma, you're saved. Otherwise you go to hell. You go to Yale or you go to jail.
Also, his relationship with the press.
Here's another contradiction. He's donated to free press initiatives, including the Committee to Protect Journalists.
But he also secretly spent tens of millions of dollars bankrolling a lawsuit filed by Hulk Hogan over the publication of a sex tape and bankrupting the independently run Gawker Media. Why did he do this? Because in 2007, one of Gawker Media's blogs, ValueAg, outed him as gay. And with the lawsuit, he
found an opportunity to get back at them by funding the lawsuit that Hulk Hogan was able to bring then, but he wouldn't have been able to do that without Thiel's money.
And finally, Thiel's biggest contradiction, his endorsement of Donald Trump.
When he was asked about his support for Trump, he was surprised at the outrage that came with it from many of his colleagues in Silicon Valley. He didn't want more of the establishment.
No matter how crazy this election seems, it is less crazy than the condition of our country.
After briefly supporting Carly Fiorina in the primaries, Thiel pivoted to Trump, donating $1.25 million to Trump and his associated super PACs in October 2016. And he didn't just help Trump financially. He gave a full-throated keynote speech supporting Trump at the Republican National Convention.
I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America.
And when Trump was finally elected, Thiel was given the reins to an enormous amount of power.
And I want to thank you, man. You have a very special guy.
He was named the transitional advisor, and in that role, he did a lot of interviewing and a lot of vetting to fill hundreds of cabinet positions and different jobs within the administration.
But it turns out Thiel's support isn't unconditional.
Talking to people who spend time with him, I have also heard that he is no longer a great supporter of Trump.
It was reported that Thiel was unhappy with the direction of Trump's presidency. Ever since, he's been mum, making no public appearances, no statements, and staying out of the spotlight altogether. Although there have been suggestions that Trump could tap Thiel for a top intelligence post or ambassadorship, there's no indication he'd accept.
He's described his relationship with politics as schizophrenic. He gets really involved, and then he runs away as fast as possible.
Whether Thiel takes a new position or simply continues as a board director at Facebook and Palantir, at just 50 years old, he's primed to wield some serious influence in technology and politics for decades to come.
Two 2016 was again the hottest year on record, and the previous 17 years have seen our 16 most scorching. Scientists overwhelmingly agree. Global warming is the culprit. And it's just getting started. Ice caps, extreme weather, wildfires, droughts, and the hits keep coming. What are we doing about it? In 2015, the world took its boldest step yet to stem climate change with a historic accord in Paris. But now comes the hard part. Nations must change energy policies and invest huge amounts of money, and they will likely do it without the United States. President Donald Trump announced on June 1st that the U.S. would withdraw from the accord.
The reality is that withdrawing is in America's economic interest and won't matter much to the climate.
Here's the situation. Decades in the making, the Paris Agreement united the U.S., China, and more than 190 other nations in a push to limit fossil fuel pollution. The UN-sponsored plan secured pledges to cut greenhouse gases, the emissions that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, in an effort to avoid the rising seas and other environmental disasters that climate models predict. But even if all pledges are met, the globe is expected to warm by as much as 3.4 degrees Celsius this century, more than the UN target of well below 2 degrees. Meeting the Paris Agreement means that governments will have to offer more incentives for clean energy, scale back support for fossil fuels, make emissions more costly, and reduce deforestation. It's estimated that the deal will require $13.5 trillion of spending through 2030. Here's the argument. Unlike past climate pacts such as the Kyoto Protocol, each country set its own Paris targets and then promised to revisit and improve them. The U.S. was primed to play a lead role in climate change, but Trump's Energy Independence Executive Order reverses Obama-era rules and directives put in place to combat climate change, and expands production of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel. The resulting policies threaten the global fight against climate change. Without the U.S. commitment to emissions reduction, other countries may join it in abandoning the Paris Agreement. This could make it almost impossible and even more expensive down the line to stop climate change. Optimists argue that the shift to a lower carbon future is already underway. Businesses, cities, and U.S. states, such as California, are already investing in wind and solar and taking other steps to make it work.
I've actually been called an environmentalist, if you can believe that.
There's an inherent attraction to light and being human. And I think on a very deep psychological level, light is this way in which we experience the energy surrounding us in a very personal manner. My name is Matt Dilling. I'm the founder of Light Bright Neon Studio, and we manufacture, produce, and restore neon works of art and design. origins of the creative content of a lot of the work at Lightbright comes from a variety of sources. Sometimes people come with a napkin sketch. Some people come with an Adobe Illustrator file. And we have a whole design team who then we kind of work together to help create layouts of what it might look like. Scale it up and create a paper template using a pen plotter. And that paper template actually becomes our guide for what we're going to bend the neon to. We take from the office into the glass shop. We pick out the right size tubing with the right color for the right size project. From there, we heat up the glass tubing. The torches heat the glass well in excess of 1,000 degrees in order for it to get into its molten state. We heat up and bend the glass tubing to match the template. One of our chandeliers has over 100 different bends in it. So each one of those bends has to be marked for a heated up bend. We also have to allow the glass to cool between the bends so that the next area can be worked on and heated up in its own unique fashion. It turns into spaghetti, and then we have to make sure that that spaghetti lines back up and cools to the template. We use a blow hose to connect our mouth to the tube, create a volume that's closed, and we can control the pressure in there with our mouth. There's just a variety of challenges that come up inherently in working with glass. Glass can crack due to stress, and sometimes you'll just have a batch that all it wants to do when it gets near a torch is crack. After we've bent various components, we have to go in using the crossfire or the hand torch and actually weld all of those pieces together. The last step on that is then to weld on electrodes onto either end. Each one of those steps is very, very specific. I draw inspiration from so many different experiences. It's hard to come up with one thing that's particular, but one of the ways that I really am able to connect with the creative is to float. Floating is a similar experience to meditation, to psychedelics. Going into a blackened room and laying out in a body of water and salt that's heated to your body temperature, and it allows for all sort of external stimulation to fall away. And your internal world really begins to bubble up and manifest. You really get to experience a different relationship to your mind. I think I work with neon because I can't not work with it. It's so challenging and so rewarding. And those things are so intertwined that there's no way of separating it out. I learn so much and continue to learn so much by working with it. I find so much inspiration in working with it, and I just continue to experience new and different things through the medium. It's that close to me at this point. Once the neon tube is completed, we have to hook it up to our manifold for bombarding. The manifold is opened, a vacuum is drawn. We check the tube for leaks with our Tesla coil. We close the tube back off, and we heat it up using a very large and powerful transformer. As the tube is heated up, it releases anything that's not inert inside the tube, and we evacuate that out. We introduce the gas into it, and we seal the tube off, sealing into that tube whatever gas we introduced into it. I think my favorite part of making a neon light is when I see it lit up for the first time. Different gases, when electrified, emit different wavelengths of light. Neon gas is this very bright orange, fiery red color. Argon gas creates a very intense blue, but that light output that is produced can then be expressed in a different wavelength by coating the inside of the tubes with a phosphor coating that takes that one wavelength of light and emits a different wavelength. we bring it over to the aging table, where we hook it up to an age-in transformer and allow it to settle, age the gas in that we've introduced to it. There's always a stray particle of something left inside the tube. But that time that the oxide coating can act to scrub whatever is left inside the tube while things are getting settled into place. Once the tubes are aged in, we move on to our process of assembling two halves of the fixture together in a jig, gluing up the center of the fixture to its spindle. Once the adhesive dried, we would connect the wires from the fixture together into a transformer, and we turn on power and it lights up. Part of what we love about what we do here is that we try and put out into the world the kind of things that we'd like to see. I still am surprised when it lights up. I'm still excited when I get to see it illuminated. There's an ineffable quality to it. To me, is this insight into the inner workings of the universe. It literally is. It's a way of looking at what is surrounding us in the cosmos in a new light.
a bit like an addiction. You've got to make something. You have to do something. It's borderline obsession. And every bike we build is my favourite bike at the time, and as soon as it's done, I want to build another one. It's Sven, cycles is something I've been thinking about ever since I started cycling in my late teens. We want bikes that ultimately you'll really enjoy riding. There's never a bike that's the same. There's always a slight change. And as we build them individually as well, they have the marks of a bike that's built by hand. Most people I know cycle have an idea of their dream bicycle. And it may be an evolving idea you've had in your head. And we've worked with a lot of people that have come to us with sketches and scrapbooks. It's really, really nice to build something that's just one-off and unique. I think a lot of people see a bicycle as two wheels and a frame in the middle. There are a lot of subtle changes and nuances in design which can change the riding characteristics quite dramatically. I'm a really big fan of modernist architecture, and the simplicity of a modernist building is really hard to achieve. And with some of our bikes, they may look very simple, but I think people should not underestimate the time and effort that goes into designing a product. Tubing is key to a bike's feel and ride. Reynolds tubing has been in my life ever since I can remember. Growing up, I could never afford a frame manufactured with their tubing. We can now put a badge on our bike saying manufactured at Reynolds, which is a sort of thing as a kid I just wouldn't have believed was going to happen. Every part of the bike has a specific tube. It's not universal. The first thing we do is get the tubes out, check they're correct, check the wall thicknesses, sand the edges, make sure it's all really clean, because if it's not clean, the tubes won't join together correctly. We build in steel because I still believe it's one of the best materials to use. It's been used in bikes since the late 1800s, and they're still using it now for a very good reason. It's the flexibility that we can replace the tube, repaint the bike, and you wouldn't know it's damaged. I just like working with it. It's very sculptural. This isn't sort of aerospace precision engineering. It's a steel rule and a marker. So when we're cutting the tubes, it's within a mil or two. But what we're trying to do is take the best from bicycle building in the past and add a little bit of modern flair to it. There's various techniques for building bicycles. We do a thing called fillet brazing, where you connect a pipe together. We use a bronze rod and a flame. We heat the tubes up to the same temperature and we fill the joint with bronze. And it gives a very, very sort of fluid, lovely, sort of quite sculptural feel. You've got to practice. You've got to be able to judge material temperatures. You've got to just look at it and you just get a feel for it. It's the stage where your tubes start to look a bit like a bicycle. My father's a jeweller. He'd make sort of very pretty things, which are lovely, but for me, they don't really have any function. What I love about bicycles, you can start on a Monday with a box of tubes. You can be riding it by the weekend, and it can last you for the rest of your life. Outside of the frame and forks, the other most important part is the wheels and tyres. When you build the wheels, you have to lace them, so there's little holes going all the way around the rim. You poke the spoke through. We do build all our wheels by hand here because a machine can't get 30 years worth of wheel building experience. Colour is very, very personal. With any of our bikes, you can have them painted whatever colour you want. We've matched one to the teapot, so we can get that scanned and we can match that, or someone's favourite item of clothing. I like to let the bike sit for 4 or 5 days minimum, just so the paint can have time to cure a little bit, and then we assemble it. We get out all the new components, and it's a case of putting them together. Some bikes you can assemble in 3 hours, some will take 3 days. And we've built bikes that cost in the £10,000 plus mark. Some people, they're saving up and this is their bike and they're going to own it for the rest of their lives. So we just want to make sure they get the right thing. I think the bike for me was the first time I had some freedom. So as soon as I had one, I was off. A lot of people still get that thrill as when they were a kid blasting down a hill, wind going through their hair. It's fun. Everyone has their favourite jacket or something that just makes them feel good. If you've got a bike that fits well, you actually feel part of it. Building bicycles as a creative outlet is fantastic. It's not something you do because you're going to get a big paycheck at the end of the day. You do it something you have a passion for it.
If you ever saw a wooden surfboard, it was probably hanging in somebody's house or underneath the deck. But kind of in the last 10 or 15 years, wood has made a big comeback. They surf wonderfully. It's beautiful and it feels great to be on one of them. I always had a love for wood and kind of passionate about things that went in the water. I've kind of been around wooden boats most of my life. There's just so much character. The way they're built, the stories that come with them, a lot of that has translated over to why we build surfboards the way we do. When we first started thinking about building surfboards, wood was the natural material we chose. They have a very high strength to weight ratio. Wooden surfboards have the longest history of use in the surf world than any other material. People have been surfing wooden surfboards since kind of the first documented history of people riding waves. The board starts in CAD, where we take a 3D model, break down the shape, and kind of create frames and templates and all the inner parts of the board that we get cut on a CNC machine. We take those frames and we just pop them out, assemble the frame into kind of a skeleton. We go out to our lumber shed, pick a bunch of cedar, and bring them into our mill shop, put glue along the edges, clamp it all together into a panel. Everything's book matched, you have symmetry in the colors and texture of the wood. Cut your outline. Take our assembled frame, gently put it down right on top of the plank. Once that foundation is started, you're basically building up the three-dimensional shape, the outside part of the board, using lots of strips that kind of interlock and fit together. Every piece of wood is going to be different, and it's all going to react differently. There are frustrations with it, but I think that's one of the things that keeps it challenging. You learn to read the kind of what the grain lines are doing and what the color of the wood is telling you. Once those rails are cleaned up, we put our top planks on. It's a little bit like putting a lid on a box. It's like, this is it. Whatever's inside that board is staying inside that board. And by tensioning some rope, you can clamp the two together. It's like a time capsule. What makes our boards unique are they are built right here in York. They're built using material that grows right here in the state of Maine. They're built 100% by hand by local craftspeople and surfers. There's a lot of time that goes into these boards, between 40 and 60 hours start to finish. We wanted to build surfboards that were as hollow as they could be, but still be strong enough to work well. Too light and they don't surf well, but too heavy and they don't surf well. So there's a balance point there, and that's where we try to be. Taking the board off the rocker table once the top has gone on, that is by far one of my top favorite parts. It's just you and a shaping stand, a board, and a hand plane. Everything else is out of your view. It's simple, it's pleasurable, it's quiet. You can be with your thoughts and you can just kind of be present. There's something about taking a nice sharp edge tool to a beautiful piece of wood and feeling the curls coming off and knowing that every pass that you're making, you're kind of getting it closer and closer to what you have in mind. Once we've shaped it down and the board's looking like it's supposed to look like, it's time for it to go into the glassing room. 4-ounce fiberglass, laying it over the board, draping it over the edges, cutting it, applying epoxy, and on the board. Once both sides are lamb coated, it's time to put in the hardware. Drill and router and install the fin box. And on the other side, we drill and put in the leash plug and a vent. There's a lot of air just naturally inside the board, and that air wants to expand and contract with temperature changes. And that vent has a little piece of Gore-Tex fabric in it, and it allows air to kind of breathe both ways, but it doesn't allow water to get in. Once all that hardware is put in, it goes back into the glassing room. We brush a nice, beautiful, thick coat of epoxy over the whole surface, and that we call a gloss coat. That's supposed to look beautiful and glossy and shiny and flawless. You get to see that board come to life. Whatever the colors in the wood, they really come out. It just makes it look like candy. You just want to touch it and run your hands down it, and it's just kind of the icing on the cake. Once everything is hard, we put it into what we call the oven, get that epoxy to cure, really kind of bake it, and just get it to harden. Put in the fin, screw in the vent, and ship it out. We just love the idea of building something that's sustainable and long-lasting and made by hand. Kind of gives you a deeper connection to the product over something you might buy on a shelf. When a customer gets the board, they feel it. They 100% feel the amount of work and the amount of passion that went into the board. So I'm not really looking at hours and efficiency. We're looking at like doing it right and enjoying it as we go.
Ma Baoli, better known as Gang La, is one of the 4 Grand Marshals leading New York's Pride Parade this year. But in the country he comes from, being gay is still a social taboo. The CEO of a Beijing-based internet company is on a mission to improve the lives of millions of gay men in China.
对于每一个 LGBT 人群来说，即使这个国家不允许你跟同性爱人结婚，但是你仍然要勇敢地去选择你自己的生活，你仍然应该拥有幸福生活的权利。
Ma's company Blue City runs an app and a website specifically for gay men. Blued is one of the biggest gay social networking apps in the world, with an estimated 30 million registered users. Unlike most other apps, Blued is more than just dating or hookups.
大家可以在我们这个软件里面找他自己的情感，然后可以阅读相关的内容，然后可以进行一些娱乐，比如玩游戏啊，比如看直播啊等等。
Back in 2000, when Ma studied at a police school in northern China, he realized he didn't feel like everyone else.
因为他们都找女朋友，然后谈恋爱，但是我对长得好看的同性的男生，我反而觉得对我更有吸引力。所以那个时候我就到互联网上去找这样的一些资料，然后希望能够告诉我自己我到底是谁。互联网上所有的信息都是负面的，都是错的，就是说同性恋要电击疗法，要被治疗，然后要吃药等等。
After visiting some foreign websites with different attitudes to homosexuality, Ma created his own site for a Chinese audience, encouraging people that
他们也是正常的，他们不用自卑，然后也不用自杀。
Even though attitudes towards homosexuals are slowly changing in China, it's still a social stigma. The virtual world of Blued, where members can be open about their sexuality, is for most a striking contrast to their real lives. This is live streaming, a function added to Blued in late 2015, right as the internet craze was starting to take off in China. Many self-made stars like Jin make decent amounts of money by receiving audiences' virtual currencies and gifts.
我们不是彼此的初恋，初恋这种事儿多不靠谱啊。
For Kyle and Klaus, a couple who have come out, live streaming on Blued means something different.
其实我经常会收到很多粉丝的一些互动的留言，就是类似就是说你们让我们看到了同志情侣之间的一些希望啊，我看到这样的留言我是很欣慰的。
The government's rules for acceptable content online may shift quickly in China, with LGBT material in a grey area. Many companies feel the chill of the recent internet crackdown, but Blue City still runs as usual. Ma has won the Chinese government's trust by helping with HIV prevention among gay men. A third of the company's staff are dedicated to screening pornographic and politically sensitive content.
我不太多的愿意去对抗，我更多的愿意去对话，去改变他们的想法。我觉得这个可能在中国来说是更有效的。
In the past 5 years, Blue City has grown from a team of 7 people to a promising business with about 250 staff. Ma said the company earned over $15 million last year, mainly through advertising and selling virtual currencies to live streaming audiences. Now the company is expanding overseas.
我希望吧，通过我们的努力，布鲁蒂能够成为全球第一家在美国纳斯达克或者是纽交所上市的这样的同质互联网公司。
This is Rich Chiga. He's a Chinese rapper by way of Indonesia, and he's very popular on the internet. This is Joji. He's a Japanese-Australian singer, and he's also very popular on the internet. Plus, Joji invented the Harlem Shake meme. Let me say that again. This guy, Joji, in the blood bathtub, invented the Harlem Shake meme. But we'll come back to that. So Rich and Joji are both signed to 88 Rising, an entertainment company hoping to build a lasting global brand that will outlive singular moments of virality. They primarily create content combining Asian culture and hip-hop, a formula that apparently pleases the internet gods greatly. They've only been around for 18 months, but they're already putting up major label numbers.
I think that we have an unprecedented collective of talent, a group of predominantly Asian artists, really making waves globally, which from an independent point of view as well.
88's founder, Sean Miyashiro, cut his teeth launching Vice's electronic music channel, Thump. But quickly, Sean became interested in life beyond dance music.
I knew that after launching a whole content platform that I have kind of the ability and the know-how to do it again, but for what was the question?
So Sean moved to the Bronx to start over and figure it out. He couldn't afford an office space, so he worked out of his car at the top of a grimy parking garage.
Everything kind of started here. If you look around, this is my environment. This is my serenity, really. 88 Rising was built here. Built on the grounds of LA Fitness, residence in a parking garage. I was living in the Bronx. I'm just damn, where the hell do I go? So I just come up here and I I just kind of figure things out every single day. Being okay, what the hell is this thing? Coming here was kind of my own kind of private office, basically. To be honest, I would even go to the bathroom here. I would take pisses here, you know what I mean? It was, it's just too far to go back down there. When I need Wi-Fi, I'd spend a good part of the day at Dunkin' Donuts. Hi, how are you? Can I get a chicken snack wrap?
Before 88 Rising officially launched, Sean caught a surprise break in the form of a Twitter friendship with a funny 16-year-old kid from Indonesia named Brian, who taught himself English by watching Rubik's Cube tutorial videos on YouTube. Seriously, that's true.
I thought his Twitter was genius, from the future, just crazy, and just the shit that he was saying, the memes he was making. But I didn't know that he rapped or anything like that. I really didn't, and he came up with that stick 2 weeks later.
12 in the morning, pop shells for a living and baby gon' smell blood trail every minute, bro.
Dat Stick was Brian's first ever attempt at making a rap song, and it immediately went viral.
Everything was great about it, but the one thing that I noticed is the song was hard as hell. Just everything about it, man. Just it was menacing, bro.
Soon after the video dropped, Brian signed with 88 Rising.
I'll FaceTime with Rich. Sorry for calling you Rich Chiga on my phone, Rich. Brian, he gets super pissed off that he's saved in my phone as Rich Chiga. He's like, dude, am I not a human to you? What's good, bro?
What's good, brother?
How you doing?
Doing great. I did the sound check.
How was it?
It was tight.
So, Brian could definitely rap, but some viewers understandably took offense at a Chinese kid satirizing rap cliches and calling himself Rich Chiga. But if a group of well-known rappers saw the video and genuinely liked it, that could at least help validate Brian as a legit hip-hop artist. Plus, it could be really funny.
It was just kind of an idea that I just had on the spot. Everything the rappers say is better and funnier and smarter and wittier. And it's just more entertaining. We just edit it as tight as possible, put it up, and it really worked.
Yo,
This nigga got a pouch on a Reebok pouch. This is the hardest nigga of all time.
He said, when you come for a chigga like me, that was dope.
It's just lit, and I think people will take it as a joke at first, but it's like if he ran with that and kept doing more videos like that, it's just lit.
You know, I'd never been to America before, and like all of a sudden, just like I see like all the rappers that I listen to just like reacting to my stuff, and I was like, what? How did this happen?
The reaction video also went viral and even led to a remix of Dat Stick featuring Wu-Tang's Ghostface.
I'll get on that track. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Really, on the remix?
Yeah. Oh, you know him?
And yeah, the remix went viral too. Brian has since acknowledged the misstep in his name and claims he may change it. But for the time being, he's still Rich Chigga to his fans. An ever-growing global audience, hungry for more releases from emerging talent around the world.
I didn't know that it was gonna be this impactful and this important to people, and I'm very thankful and blessed that it has. And every day now that I wake up, it's like it's just like a new mission every day.
A major part of that mission involves Joji. Remember the bloody bath guy? He's a former YouTube personality in the middle of a career transition.
The sound of this song, Will He, it's like a trap song that you can like slow dance to. Awkward prom shit, you know what I mean? I used to do crazy episodic internet videos. It was going well, and one day it was me and a few friends just in a room. We were casually chilling, and then someone plays the song, and it's brand new at the time. I happened to have a lot of costumes laying around, so I told the other guys, I was like, get in these costumes and let's just dance to it. Like, who cares? We were like, okay, let's just go crazy at the drop. So that video goes up. I go to sleep, and the next morning, everyone's doing it. Like, next morning. That taught me a lot about the internet, how people want to just be a part of something. And from that point on, something changed, and I was a little better at understanding demographics and people and, what they want to see and what they want to hear. I was friends with a couple other artists who were affiliated with 88, and then I also started to realize that 88 is the bridge between Western and Asian entertainment, and I really wanted to be a part of that.
Joji just released the In Tongues EP, his first project as a serious artist.
Joji's In Tongues record came out a couple weeks ago. It's #2 on Billboard on the R&B charts, which is crazy for, independent release, and he's like a brand new artist.
And the success is even more impressive, knowing he went from creating something like this.
It's just Taco Bell. What could possibly go wrong?
To creating something like Tonight, Rich Chigga has a show in New York City. Tickets sold out in an hour.
I came here, I'm first online. I was here at 1.
I was the third person online.
So why'd you get here so early?
Because I want to see Rich Chigga. I want to touch him.
What do you guys think of Joji?
He's
That's my dad, son.
You guys copped the new EP or like?
Yeah. I woke up at 6 in the morning just to copy that shit. And then I listened to it, and that shit started making me cry.
This is actually kind of exciting. Every time, this never gets old. Like, you live online and social media, but like, there's nothing like just being with the people.
often than not, viral success happens by accident. And then after an appearance on Ellen or Jimmy Kimmel, the creator's star power fizzles out. But 88 Rising has figured out how to turn potential gimmicks into brands with an actual following that keeps coming back for the next thing.
Oh, shit!
So keep an eye out for 88's next move. But more than likely, it won't be covered on network television or terrestrial radio. Although, as they've already proven, nowadays that really doesn't matter.
Online retailer Farfetch is betting it can shape the future. This is its concept store, showcasing the latest in retail tech.
How do you capture all of that fantastic information that you gather in store with customers, touch and feel products? And we created a concept called the connected rail. And this is using a combination of RFID and ultrasound. The RFID signal recognizes the product, and the ultrasound recognizes the movement. Take the product off, and then you'll start to see your products appear. And essentially, it's like online browsing behavior. Whichever products you touch and pick up in the store are automatically sent to your app. This is effectively what you've created is your in-store wish list. In the middle, you'll see essentially a hologram of the product. What the customer sees, they control the experience on a touch device. What this allows the customer to do is take elements of products and then add their own style to it. Right, so this is the connected mirror. So in this example, I see my products. I select a coat, and that's tried it, and it's slightly too big for me. So what I can do is choose an alternative size and send a request to the sales associate, and they'll bring that size to me in the fitting room mirror. You'll also see that we've got some product recommendations here. Crucially, the sales associate's able to push items into the mirror from their device. If you wanted to, you could simply use the mirror and pay and go. Your items would then be packed and dispatched to you afterwards.
Do you want me to turn you so you're looking outwards? Yes, please. How about there? First time we came out with B, Jade said, "It feels like I've been released from prison." Do you want these, Mrs.?
Definitely.
Definitely. Right.
Yeah.
And she could say hello to everybody, people she hadn't seen for months.
It's
Hi,
Jade.
it's Jade.
Oh. So you can talk to Jade through this.
Hi, Katie. She's there.
Hi.
Every time anyone's seen her, they want to know why she's there. And it's kind of the opposite of when you're in a wheelchair and people see you and they kind of go, oh, should I look? I don't know what the right protocol is. When there's a tiny robot with its bright little eyes going around just looking happy everywhere, it really opens you up for conversation.
You've got some friends here, look.
Hiya! When I saw her for the first time, I remember thinking, this is going to change things. This is one of those points where if this was a book, this would be the cliffhanger. condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that I have a lot of dislocations, there's a lot of pain, and a lot of seizures and whatnot. So I can end up on my own in my room for long periods of time. A lot of the time, with a condition like my own, of course there's the pain, and the pain is bad, and the dislocations are bad, and the seizures and being in paralysis and never knowing whether you're going to be able to wake up properly tomorrow, that's bad. But what's worse still is being able to count the number of people you see a day on one hand.
Are you ready?
Sure am. I'm just hoping the connection's going to stay.
Yeah, me too. Alright, here we go.
When you're used to just the same little metre by metre and a half window every day, and you've been there for months, being able to just see the sky from somewhere else, or the tops of trees, or a sign, is incredible. Or being able to have that kind of chat in the car that most people would probably take for granted.
I'm going to go past Grandma and Grandad so you can give them a wave. Now, if Jade is particularly seizure-y, she can still take part. And that's brilliant, really, because before she would just be left in a bed or in the house with just her carers. It's quite a small world, that.
Right, so there's one of her. Here, this costume I'm busy making at the moment. When I'm not on bed rest and I'm not just wearing pyjamas all the time, I enjoy being able to dress as different characters and go to Comic Cons and that kind of thing, because it just lets me show a different side of myself, and it's a bit of fun. If you can't go out that often, you've got to enjoy it when you do. Was that? Mm-hmm. Good. It's one of those weird things where I want to not have to use B because I want to be well enough to be able to go to those places myself. Like, it really makes a big difference to me to be able to go into school. But the thing is, with my condition fluctuating all of the time, I can't go into school reliably. And so far it's interesting. Still a few little things that we need to work out, but for the most part I think it's going fairly well, and it's brilliant because I can really tell the difference between today and yesterday. How yesterday I forced myself to go into school when I wasn't very well and I was really tired afterwards and ended up having loads of seizures, whereas today I've been able to do all of the work, I've been able to keep a clear head and not be ill, which means I'm able to be more focused on my schoolwork.
So there is my first step of working, is to simplify root 8. The algebra test is next week.
Now I'm trying to make friendships which I'll be able to maintain with B. Before that, I end up letting people down quite often. B gives me hope, yeah. She's just always there. And if I can't do something, she can. And if I need sort of assistance to be able to make commitments, then she's there, and she means that I feel like a more valuable person because I'm more reliable.
it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for fifth generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.